everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our Facebook Live. As you know, March is Women's History Month, and I'm joined by two amazing women who are crushing it in the public health space. We're coming to you live from the NYU College of Global Public Health. They're here to share their experiences in the field, share life experiences, and give us advice, especially with young women like myself. If you're watching us live, don't forget to comment below, tell us where you're from, and ask any of us questions. I'm joined by Dr. Danielle Ompad and Dr. Melody Goodman. Thank you guys so much for being on our show today.
Thank you for having us.
Awesome. So let's dive right in. So for some of our viewers that don't know a lot about your background, can you just go and tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and
So I'm an associate professor in the Department of Biostatistics here at the College of Global Public Health. My research focuses on health disparities. Broadly, I'm really interested in racial and social economic disparities, particularly in urban populations. What do? I teach biostatistics classes and do research and mentor students.
Yeah, awesome.
So my name is Danielle Ompad, and I'm an associate professor here at the College of Global Public Health in the Department of Epidemiology. And my areas of interest are primarily around substance use, particularly people who use illicit drugs, and that intersection with infectious diseases like HIV and hepatitis. I also do a little bit of dabbling in urban health and a little bit of work around adult access to vaccines like the hepatitis vaccine. And I teach epi courses as well as an online course on HIV and AIDS from the global perspective.
Awesome. And you guys have talked about a little bit about the type of research that you do. How or what cascade of events got you to that particular specific type of research?
So I can tell my story.
Okay.
When I was about 12 or 13, I read this novel by Robin Cook, who writes like medical murder mysteries, and it was called Outbreak, not like the Dustin Hoffman movie, it's a different story. It was about this female epidemiologist who was a part of the Epidemiology Intelligence Service at the CDC, and she was running around the US trying to stop Ebola outbreaks. And so that's when I first decided that I wanted to be an epidemiologist, which was kind of rare for somebody in my generation because most people that I went to school with came to epidemiology after they had started a career in something else, like in medicine or engineering or something like that. And then, I grew up during the AIDS epidemic, the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. And when I was in high school, there was this really interesting movie that came out called And the Band Played On. And so it kind of chronicled the beginning of the HIV epidemic. And the thing that struck me about this movie was that it was really unfair what was happening to people. So like gay men were being discriminated against and treated really horribly, and they weren't able to go and see their partners in the hospital. And then there were all these racial disparities in HIV, and there were drug users who were being treated horribly. And so that really set my interest in towards infectious diseases, as well as looking at racial and ethnic disparities.
Wow, that's so amazing.
Yeah, I watch a lot of TV. So.
How are you, Dr. Goodman?
So my path into public health wasn't that direct because I didn't know what I really wanted to do in undergrad other than be rich. So I went to Wall Street because if you want to be rich, that's the place to go do it. So I started my career as a financial analyst at an investment bank and made a lot of money. But there's where I sort of realized that being rich had more to do with money, that I wanted a job that was also fulfilling and that would allow me to give back to communities like the one I grew up in. And so when I was deciding what I wanted to do after I left banking, that's when I found biostatistics. And so when I was in grad school in biostatistics, I was just starting. I was the summer before my first semester. I was working with a mentor there, Dr. Marcello Pagano at the Harvard School of Public Health. And we were working on some data, and he just said something matter-of-factly. He said, Black infant mortality is double that of whites. That's the way it's always been. It's been like that for 20 years, which was right. It was a very statistically correct statement. But when he said it in that moment, I sort of was like, well, why? I don't understand. And he was just like, because it is. And I was like, but I don't understand why. And he wanted to like move on, but I kept being like, but no, really, why is there a difference? I don't understand. And so that was sort of when I decided I was interested in health disparities, because I really wanted to understand like why these differences exist and why people were just okay saying there's a difference.
Yeah.
And not really talking about why that was.
You needed to answer that question.
By the way, her mentor wrote the biostatistics book that I used when I was in graduate
Really?
school.
Oh
yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, I use her book for my biostatistics.
Because she just came out with 2 biostatistics books.
I still use that till today, which is amazing. So like, we've talked a little bit about your background, how you guys got into public health. Now, like, it's, as you know, Women's History Month. I would ask, like, if any, what do you think are some common misconceptions or myths or assumptions of women in, this space, be it biostatistics, epi, maternal and child health? What would you say are like general myths or, misconceptions or assumptions?
I would say, particularly in public health, they think that women do the softer sciences, but I think Dr. Ompad and I are like showing that that's a contradiction. Like, we are doing biostat and epi, which tend to be sort of the harder, tougher, rigorous sciences of public health. So I think sometimes people think that women are not doing really rigorous, intensive science or really quantitative work. But there's lots of us out there who love the numbers and would be in it all day if that's what we had the chance to do.
Yeah.
That's true. And to add to that, I would say if you look at people who are enrolled in public health programs, there are quite a few women. Like, most of our students are women. Men are a minority in public health admissions, but when you look at faculty, tenured faculty, and when you look at administration, I would say that that's not always the case. When I was in graduate school, it was mostly women who were taking public health courses, but the faculty was mostly male, particularly the senior faculty. Now, that's not the case at the College of Global Public Health, because we have an amazing leadership team that's actually mostly made of women, but in schools across the country, that's not always the case. And so I think as the generation of women who went through public health school when we were in school are assuming leadership positions, and the women who trained us are assuming leadership positions, but it's not as the administration and the tenure faculty don't always represent the same distribution of students.
And hopefully in a couple of years that begins to change.
I think it's changing. I think we're a great example of a place where there's quite a bit of diversity, both in terms of gender and in terms of race and ethnicity.
And even speaking of, that and moving up the hierarchy of, career paths, how important is getting a PhD for public health students? If they do get one, what are apart from like academia, what other possible, career paths could people do with that, something like that?
I think it really depends on what you want to do, whether or not getting a PhD is important. For some students, an MPH is a perfectly fine terminal degree. It gives them the skill sets to do the work that they want to do, particularly if you want to work in like a community-based organization or a non-governmental organization. An MPH is a great degree to sort of end with. I think if you really want to do research in any capacity inside the academy or outside, then a PhD is a really great degree to have in that space, because you get lots more research training, whereas your MPH, I think you get more practice training.
And I think in addition to that, you have a little bit more autonomy to study the things that you want to study and to set your own research agenda. And then to add to that, there was a second part to your question, which was,
what type of work would students find outside of academia?
So I actually didn't start in academia. I started working for a nonprofit that had a research unit. And so I worked there for about 9 years, but I was conducting research. So it was almost like academia, except I didn't have to teach, and I didn't have advisees, and I didn't have a lot of committee meetings to go to.
Sounds like an amazing job.
No, I actually purposely came to NYU because I missed being around students, because I feel like students keep you on your game. Like, y'all work me hard, and I appreciate that. But there are other things. So like I have friends that I went to school with. Some of them work in pharmaceutical companies. Some of them work for departments of health. They work for non-governmental organizations. I have a friend who works for Family Health International. I have another friend who works for Westat. I have a friend who works in the Ministry of Health in Brasilia, in Brazil. And his partner actually runs tuberculosis programming for the country. So I think that there are a lot of options for people outside of academia, and all I think are very viable. You will definitely be able to have a good quality of life, and you will have the opportunity to do some really fulfilling work.
And you know, with that being said, you know, I feel like as opposed to getting a PhD, you listed all these things we could do. How about just like a regular MPH? Would we, for students like I myself, I'm graduating in a couple of months, like would I have to work twice as hard to get to those types of, you know, places? Or what would your advice to, you know, be to someone like that looks like me who wants to get to those places? Would a PhD be the most viable option, or an MPH is just okay, but I might have to work like twice as hard as?
I don't know that you have to work twice as hard. I think you have to work a little bit longer. So I think a master's with like 5 years of experience is like an entry-level PhD, right? And so it may take you more time to climb the corporate ladder, even though it may not be in a corporate setting. And someone with a PhD may come in at a slightly higher level. But I think a really good master's person, if you really have good skills, you can move up in your organization.
And I think it really depends on what you want to do and what you want your work life to be, right? In academia, somebody with an MPH would possibly be a lecturer, but not a full professor, right? Unless they had another terminal degree like a MD or a doctorate in nursing or something like that. But in an organization, in a non-governmental organization or a community-based organization, they could very well be the leader of the research unit, or they could be leading the monitoring and evaluation unit, right? So I think it just really depends on what you want to do with your life, what type of public health problems you want to work on, and how you want to work on those. Because we've talked a lot about research, but there's also public health practice.
Yeah.
Right? So implementing programs, evaluating programs, not necessarily just doing research.
Yeah. And you know, speaking about, you know, research and all these things, what would you say is the most challenging part about, you know, the work you guys do?
Finding enough hours in a day and enough days in the week. I don't think anything I do is like immensely hard. Like any single thing I do is hard. I think it's just the volume of the number of things that I'm trying to do. And I will admit that like I'm an overachiever, so clearly I probably take on way too much than what I should. So for me, it's not like I can't do anything. It's like, how do I get everything done that I want to do?
Yeah.
And I think for myself, and I think for a lot of women, saying no is really hard.
Yeah.
Like there are lots of opportunities, and I think because we're so busy and because we want to do good work and because we want to be able to do some really cool things, sometimes we say yes a little bit too much.
Yeah.
Because in my case, it's often because I want to help, I want to be a part of the solution, and you know, every now and then I probably need to say no a little bit more frequently.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, being just a little bit more specific, are there any maybe challenges you've experienced by virtue of your gender in this public health space?
I thought about this a little bit. I really can't think of any, mainly because I think public health as a discipline in the academy is female friendly. Like Dr. Ompad said, there's usually more females in your classes. And I think while there's not always a lot of female in the upper levels of faculty or administration, there's generally lots of like junior level faculty who are women. So I can't really think of anything offhand that I feel like because I was a woman.
So for me, it's a little bit different because I've done some work with kind of large multinational organizations in other countries. And I'm not sure if the issue is because I look young or because I'm a female, but sometimes I think I sometimes get underestimated.
Yeah. I feel like
Possibly
age has been a bigger barrier for me than gender.
Yeah.
Because most of my career I've spent in a medical school. And I even had someone say, like, people will respect you when you have more gray hair. But I'm a woman and I try to avoid having gray hair or showing that I have gray hair.
I'm not trying to let that show. I'm
So
sorry.
it's one of those things where it's like, do I want to show you how old I am, or do I rather you think that I'm young and just don't know what I'm doing?
Yeah, but sorry, go
Oh
ahead.
no, so sometimes I think it's hard to disaggregate the age effects versus the gender effects. Generally, I don't think gender has been as much of an issue as age.
And when you get into these situations where people like underestimate your capabilities, what do you do?
I try to participate in meetings in a way that is thoughtful and helpful. I try not to be too assertive or aggressive so that it looks like I'm trying to make up for something, but I definitely try to drop some knowledge on people so they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I love
She
when
has
people
something to
underestimate
say.
me.
Yeah, what do you do?
Because it just gives you the opportunity to be perceived as so much better, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
if people think that you're not that great, you only have to be good to be great, right? Like if people think you're like super great, then you always have to like show that you're better than that. So I feel like when people underestimate you, that's just your chance to shine, to really show like I know my stuff, and you don't have to be aggressive about it. You can just sort of shine quietly and say like, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And again, for our viewers who are out there, don't forget to ask these awesome ladies or myself some questions. So we're gonna continue with some of the questions. So thinking back, to your time in grad school, what steps did you guys take to ensure that you were on the right trajectory for like a solid, career in public health? That might be a little different for you because you like made a left to Wall Street to be like, hey, let's make some money.
I think the purpose of grad school is to prepare you for that. So even though I don't feel like I necessarily took the steps, I feel like the program I was in was designed to make sure that I took all the necessary steps to be prepared for a solid career in public health. I think one of the things that is really important for anyone who wants to study public health is I think you have to be someone who's interested in constantly learning. It's not a field where you like just go to school and that's it. Like you can ask Dr. Ompad, I'm always on a webinar. There's always something new you can learn, even about things you already know. Even about Stata, the software I teach you guys, I'm always on a webinar to learn like what's the newest thing, what's the coolest thing, what do they do next? And so I think if you're interested in public health and you're interested in trying to address these problems, you have to be someone who's constantly interested in learning, because even the news impacts what happens in public health, what happens day to day. So I think you have to be someone who's like a nerd's nerd. Like I always like to learn.
I also think you have to be resourceful. And I think a good doctoral training program will teach you how to be resourceful. And what that means is that if you don't know the answer, you have the skill set to figure out how to get the answer. So like I teach intermediate epi and epi methods and design, where I'm teaching students Stata. And you remember what I told you guys, right? Don't come ask me about Stata until you've gone to the Stata YouTube channel, the Stata help menu, and the UCLA ATS website, right? And the reason why I did that is not because I don't know the answers, although sometimes I don't, but the reason why I did that is I'm not going to be there with you in your first job, and you need to be able to find that information for yourself, right? And so I think programs that teach you to be resourceful, that set you up to have to find out things on your own, are the ones that are going to prepare you the best in terms of being able to be successful in your career.
And that's, I think, is important. And, I sit in a classroom, I'm learning about all these public health things. That's extremely different from like actually doing public health work, public health research. What would you say is like one of the biggest misconceptions, especially among students that are in a classroom when it comes to public health practice?
So I think the biggest misconception, and it's partly our fault, I think, as instructors, but we have to do it this way, is that in the classroom, everything works. All the examples work out, all the things work to show you what we want to show you, and in the real world, it's like almost always the opposite. Things never really work out in practice the way you think they're going to work out the first time. And so I think that's the biggest misconception, because when we do all this stuff in class, we always show you examples that we know work out, because we're trying to teach you something and we're trying to show you that thing.
Yeah.
And I think because all the examples you've seen have worked, sometimes when you get into your first job and the first thing you do doesn't work, it's like a life-shattering moment where you realize, like, it doesn't work, right? And so I think that's the biggest misconception, is that, like, it's going to work all the time. It's not that you can't make things work, but it doesn't usually work the way you've intended it to work. You always usually have to find a workaround.
And I think we make things look a little too easy sometimes. So not just about working, but you know, I tell you stories about going somewhere and doing some kind of research, and it makes it seem like it's really easy. But I think people underestimate how uncomfortable working in public health can be. And by uncomfortable, I mean like physically uncomfortable. So sometimes you're hot and sweaty and gross, and you know, you're like, and you still have to like be on. And sometimes you're freezing and you have to be on. And sometimes you're in a room with somebody and they say something and that is a little off-putting, and you still have to be diplomatic because you want your program to be implemented. And so we don't necessarily talk about the things that are hard, the things that are challenging, and the times when we've been uncomfortable but still had to like move our agendas forward.
And I would say the other thing is we don't talk about how long it takes to do things. So we're like, oh, I have this partnership, and that, you know, the partnership does this, but we don't tell you that it took us 2 years to build that partnership to get it to the point where the partnership could do whatever we're talking about.
Yeah. That's, I think, for me, just going back to my experience in Ghana, it was an amazing experience. We were posted to like a rural part of, you know, Ghana near the border, and there was like limited internet access. You know, there were power outages, and I'm like, this is what public health looks like. Like in the midst of all of that, we still had to do data analysis. Like we had to pull out data and figure out how to randomize. It was, but I mean, I think that was one learning experience for me that I could have never learned in a class. Like I could be told about it, but I wouldn't be able to experience it. So we have some questions. Lindsay Killett would like to know, to Dr. Ompad or Dr. Melody, what advice do you have for professionals trying to say yes to saying no?
So you have to practice. And by practice, I mean you have to do it a few times, but sometimes you also have to have those conversations in your head, like practice having the conversation before you have the conversation. And 9 times out of 10, you're not saying no because there's something about the task or something about the person. It's that you just don't have time. So you have to say no, but give people an explanation. For example, I would love to do this, but right now I just have too many deadlines coming up, but if there's another opportunity, please keep me in mind. So you're leaving the door open. It's a very respectful no, and you're kind of explaining that, you know, I'm a busy person.
So I would say one of the things I learned in the Midwest, and I didn't learn a whole lot living in the Midwest, but one of the things that I did learn living in the Midwest is how to create a no sandwich. So you smush your no in between 2 yeses, and then it doesn't feel like a no.
I love that, no sandwich.
So it's like, yes, that's a really good idea. No, I'm sorry, I can't participate, but yes, please keep me in mind for future things. Right? So you squish your no in between 2 yeses.
That is really amazing.
That's a great skill.
Yeah, like I need to write that down. I mean, I was just talking a little bit about my travel. Public health, involves a lot of travel. We're always going to conferences. I would say, what has been the best travel experience, that you've had, especially in terms of your career thus far?
Ooh.
You have to think about that one. Yeah.
I have a lot of
top two.
I have a lot of excellent travel experiences.
Yeah.
I would say that, I've been working in Ukraine for several years with an amazing organization called Alliance for Public Health. And I actually came to that relationship through a colleague at SUNY Downstate named Jack Dehovitz. And it wasn't really the travel, it's working with a group of public health professionals who are really dedicated to their work, to the population that they're working with, and they work hard and they play hard. So I would have to say my trips to Ukraine, which is why I've brought NYU students through Capstone to Ukraine, because this is such an amazing organization.
Yeah.
They're doing such great work. And I feel like our students can have a lot to learn from them. So that's like been one like work-related thing. And then some of my, I've done a lot of traveling. One of the coolest things I've done is my a classmate that I went to graduate school with got married in Laos. So I flew to Laos, Luang Prabang, to go to her wedding. And it was a beautiful wedding. Her father-in-law performed it. There were like, it was a destination wedding, so it was very small. And we had cooking classes. We went and saw the elephants, and then we rode the elephants into the river. The elephants, the minute they hit the river, they decided that it was time to go to the bathroom, which was fine. We got off the elephants, and then we got on kayaks to go down that same river. So the whole time I'm going down the river, I'm like, I'm gonna keep my mouth shut the whole time. But it was awesome.
Oh,
it was absolutely awesome.
Oh, that is amazing.
Yeah.
I think my best trip is when we went to the Turkana Basin in Kenya, and I happened to be in Kenya when President Obama was being first inaugurated
my goodness.
here in the U.S. So it was nice to see like how they celebrated. So they had lots of like African cloth with his face on it.
Yeah. Did you get it?
Yeah. Yes. And then my other sort of favorite thing is a weird thing, but I actually like going to APHA each year, the American Public Health Association meeting, because I get to see all my friends, and I think it's like a public health Christmas. Like if you're interested in public health, it's like where you would go. It's like Toys R Us for public health.
Yeah,
So it's, you know, where you would go, and it's every year. So people that you don't get to see, like once a year, I get to see them at APHA.
Yeah, and obviously both of you guys are going this year.
I don't know if I'm going this
Yeah,
year. We'll have to see. But it's in San Diego. And I have some colleagues. Actually, my doctoral advisor is on the administration at UC San Diego. So it's definitely a motivator to go there, because she's just such an amazing epidemiologist and a mentor still.
And how important are these conferences? Is it like a great networking experience for like a young person like me that, you know, is trying to establish themselves in the field? Would you say?
I really like APHA because I do think it's one of the meetings where you see people work hard and play hard. People tend to have a good social time after the meeting's over while they're at APHA, because you're there for like 5 or 6 days. So like there's multiple evenings where you're in a city that you don't live in, and so you tend to not go home and watch TV. You tend to like hang out with other colleagues.
And all the schools of public health tend to have some kind of mixer or cocktail hour or something like that. And if you went to multiple schools, you kind of do the rounds. So it's really a lot of fun. There's also for people just starting out in public health, there's a career expo that employers will come to. You should bring your resume and have it ready to go. That can be an amazing opportunity. It's also, like the science can be really good too, and it's an opportunity to talk with people who are, you know, at the cutting edge of public health. So you can be in a talk and listen to someone, you can ask questions during the talk, but you can also go up to them afterwards, make sure you have some cards, because often they're running off to their next meeting, but you can try to get their cards and, you know, facilitate some conversations with them. So
I'm gonna check out APHA.
you should.
So we're gonna start winding down a little bit, but I have a couple more questions left. You know, what advice, I mean, do both of you have for young women as well as young women of color that want to establish themselves in public health?
I would say get really good training. Like go to a place where you're gonna get really good training, and that I will just leave it at that. And then I would say do something that you're really passionate about, because if you're passionate about what you're doing, you're going to do a good job.
I would, in addition to that, because I would definitely co-sign that, I would say identify mentors who can mentor you in the way you need to be mentored. I think every person requires different things from their mentors, right? Some people need to be micromanaged. Some people just need a check-in and they're pretty independent. You need to recognize how mentoring will work best for you and identify them. I've had some amazing women mentors and actually a lot of mentors that are diverse in a lot of other ways. And what I've learned from my mentors is both what I want to do and in some cases what maybe I don't want to do, right? And so you should always, like, don't put your mentors on a pedestal because your mentors are people, right? And just recognize that there are some things your mentors may do that you're like, okay, I see why they did that, but I might have done this in a different way, and just file that away. You can learn what to do and what not to do from your mentors.
So I would add a couple of things to that. I would say you need a mentoring team. Don't think that one person is going to fulfill all your needs as a mentor. So think like a basketball team, different people play different positions. Your mentoring team should be similar, like different people play different positions. And then the other thing I would say is that don't look for mentors because of the package that they come in. When I was first starting out, I was looking for Black female mentors. And like Dr. Ompad said, there's just not a lot in senior positions. Hopefully for you, that will be different, but for me,
it just a plethora of women.
It just wasn't that different. And I've actually found that some of my best mentors have been white men, and they've invested in me just the same. And so if I was closed to only wanting a female mentor or only wanting a mentor of color, I would have lost out on some great opportunities.
Yeah, and I would follow up with, how do you guys make lasting connections? Because I mean, you said like we should watch out for like people that come in pretty packages or whatnot. But if we do identify someone that we want to engage with, how would you say is the best way to make a lasting impression or maintain a really good relationship with someone that we want to work with or someone that we want to mentor?
Do good work and be thoughtful when you ask questions. It's sort of like being a good student, right? If you ask really good questions in class, if you're doing really well, your professor will remember you. And if you kind of just sit in the middle of the pack, then it's kind of harder for your professor to remember you. The same thing is true. Like, when students come into my office and they ask really thoughtful questions, I'll run into Dr. Ompad's office and be like, oh my God, you'll never believe what this student just said to me. And she's only in high school, or she's only in undergrad, whatever the case may be. So I think even just asking good questions sometimes can leave a lasting impact on someone.
I think so. And I also think, by the time you get to graduate school, we're all adults, right? And so I think that I enjoyed my times in your classes because you guys were just so engaging and like so thoughtful, and it was a small class, and each and every person really contributed to make the class go well. You even tolerated my Zumba videos, which I really appreciate.
I love them.
I make students do Zumba before we start class because we have evening classes and they're all really tired because they've worked all day or been studying all day. And they're eating dinner in my class, which is completely fine, but they need to wake up a little bit. So we do a little Zumba. But I feel like you guys, I think really engaging with your professors and what they're trying to teach you is the way to make an impression. Because a lot of times it's not even the students that get the best grades that make the impressions. It's often the ones that try the hardest, that come and see you and they're like, I really don't understand this, or I want to understand this better, or can you help me think through this, right?
Yeah. And I would say we've talked a lot about your experiences, your research, advice. My question is, why public health? Why is it so important to you as a person?
So I think of public health as a nice complement to medicine, and I think if you think about what physicians do, they help one person at a time. But I like to think about what we're doing as helping one community or one population at a time. And so I just think it's like a bigger impact. So for me, that was like one of the main pulls, was like I could help more people doing this thing than if I was seeing a patient for 7 minutes each, right? And not that we need physicians, so we need people to do that. But I just think for me, one of the pulls was I could help a lot more people in one time if I really focused on these problems.
I think for me, part of it is my personality. So when I was younger, my dad used to call me Niele. And when I was a kid, I thought that was short for Kaniela, which is how you say Danielle in Hawaiian, because my family's from Hawaii. Turns out, in my 30s, I learned that Niele means nosy, right? So I am very nosy. I always have been nosy. Like, growing up, my babysitter's kids used to tell me I was nosy. Like, I was the kid in class who always asked questions. So being an epidemiologist, I basically get to be nosy for my career, so it fits really well with my personality.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I like things to be as fair as possible, and I know fair is an ideal and it doesn't always happen, but I don't like injustice, and I feel like public health is a place where you can address all sorts of injustices, right? When I was younger, I was like, I want to be a voice for people who don't have a voice. And now that I'm a little bit older and, we have all these different initiatives like Black Lives Matter and what's going on in Florida with those kids, I feel like part of it is not that I need to be a voice for somebody, but I need to amplify other voices. And I feel like you can do that in public health.
Yeah, nice. A couple more questions, 2 more questions actually. Who are your biggest public health inspirations?
Ooh.
Got to think about that one.
So I would say one of mine would be Dr. David Blackwell. He was an African American statistician. A lot of people don't know him, but he was the first African American to be tenured at Berkeley, and he was the first African American to be accepted into the Academy of Sciences. And I think statisticians often don't get the shine that maybe other professions get, but he's one of the people that I look up to because it shows you that we've been doing this for a really long time at some of the highest levels.
For me, I would say that it is, now I'm going to blank on his name. He was like my hero when I was a student. I'm going to yell it out in the middle of the night, but I'll tell you what he did. So he was the person in charge of the smallpox eradication campaign for WHO, like the American in charge of it. And I have this like passion for infectious diseases. I actually have a favorite virus, which is like, this makes me a nerd's nerd. But this person basically kind of led that effort to eradicate a whole disease. And he was a little ruthless about it in some ways, but sometimes you have to be like that to make things happen. He was one of the people as a student that I really wanted to be able to meet and hear speak. And I actually, not Hoover. It's not Don Hoover, that was my biostats professor. But anyways, so it was that person.
Yeah, awesome. And final question, any parting words of wisdom?
Oh, wow, the pressure.
I know.
So much pressure.
I know.
We should turn that back to you. You're actually a current student. Like, what would you tell someone?
I mean, I would say build relationships as fast as you can. You only have 2 years. There's a lot to learn. Take it one day at a time, I would say. But also, you guys kind of have to answer the question. Okay. No, parting words of wisdom. Like, what would you say to yourself if you were in grad school right now? Or I don't know.
I would say focus on skills and content and not on grades.
Yeah.
If you focus on the skills that you need to build to be effective in the workforce, and the content area that you're interested in, the grades will come. But if you're so focused on the grades, you're going to miss the opportunity to really dig deep. Right?
I think one of the things I didn't do enough of was really take advantage of the faculty who were around. Like, I got to know them personally, but I wish I really like picked their brains more and worked on more projects with the faculty members that were around in grad school. I was just trying to survive and get the grades. But I wish I would have took Dr. Ompad's advice and really like took advantage of like where I went to grad school and what that meant and what they had to offer me.
Yeah. All right, so to close out this conversation to our viewers, NYU students are welcome to contact the Wasserman Center for support in career development, resume and cover letter writing, interviewing, negotiating, a lot. In addition, they have a permanent location, and they also come to the GPH Student Lounge on Tuesday, as well as you can set up appointments for them on Thursdays. Don't forget to check our website at publichealth.nyu.edu. And I want to thank these 2 amazing ladies for coming on our show today. Thank you so much.
Us.
Thank you for having us.
And we'll catch you guys next time on Facebook Live. Thank you.